The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the guests appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of 8 News Now or Nexstar Media Group.
I recognize that it is a controversial issue, but I also recognize that the state of Nevada is pretty split on whether we should keep the death penalty or abolish it.
Tonight on Politics Now, District Attorney Steve Wolfson talks to us about his support for the death penalty and plea deals. Plus,
has there been any buzz on rent control?
Don't say those words.
What's behind surging rents and what the solution may be, and
that's my mission. That's what gets me up in the morning.
Henderson candidate for Mayor Dan Stewart, who wants to see his city form its own school district.
From 8 News Now, this is Politics Now.
District Attorney Steve Wolfson says his new priority will be diversion programs for low-level offenders in the court system. Thanks for joining us. I'm Vanessa Murphy. John Langler is off. Wolfson has been in office since 2012, and he plans on staying there. John talked with him about the 2022 DA race.
One of your pitches that you've highlighted during your time there, smart reform programs, diversion programs. Explore a little bit what the programs are and how they have they worked as they've been put into the justice system.
Well, what we've learned over the years is we have to be a little smarter about how we do business in the criminal justice system. So we've started redefining and refocusing our priorities. And one of the things we've created is a program called Project Redirect. It is a diversionary program. It's the first of its kind in Nevada. We realize that most cases never go to trial, and most cases involving low-level nonviolent offenders get resolved in a plea bargain. They get misdemeanors or sometimes even dismissals. But we want to offer certain treatment programs to these people. If there are victims and restitution is owed, we want to collect that restitution. So we created Project Redirect, which diverts people out of the system.
Are you willing to discuss possibly adjusting your use of the death penalty in prosecutions?
Well, yes, absolutely. And I have engaged in those discussions, and I continue to engage in those discussions. But a little history is appropriate. My predecessor filed almost 20 death penalty cases a year before I took office. My first 6-7 years, I reduced that number to under 10. So I cut the number of death penalty cases in half. And in the last 2 or 3 years, I've only filed a handful. Because I recognize the state of Nevada has not executed anybody since 2006. And just a couple of years ago, when a very violent person who was convicted of a couple of homicides, where the jury invoked the death penalty, and he wanted to be executed, and we still couldn't execute Mr. Dozer, and he ended up committing suicide in prison. I recognize that it is a controversial issue, but I also recognize that the state of Nevada is pretty split on whether we should keep the death penalty or abolish it. I've even suggested perhaps a referendum. Let's educate Nevadans on both sides of the issue so that Nevadans can speak up and voice their opinion.
There's been some questions raised about why grand juries have been called in certain cases. I'm thinking of the Officer Kenneth LaPera case. There's a couple other ones as well, the Byron Williams, Jorge Gomez cases. Educate the viewers, if you can, why you called grand juries in those cases, and if you think that was the appropriate method of trying to find resolution.
The LaPera case, that was the officer. We took that case to the grand jury because we wanted to see if we could move it into district court. But that grand jury failed to find probable cause. So that's a body of citizens that listened to the evidence and said, we don't think there's enough evidence to proceed.
How would you characterize the effort by prosecutors in that case to actually prosecute Officer LaPera?
I had some of my best prosecutors working that case, but the officer had good lawyers themselves. These lawyers presented us with another side to the story. We are required by law to present what is called exculpatory evidence to the grand jury. That's evidence that tends to negate guilt. We are required by law to present that. which is what we did. So after a full investigation and after a full presentation to the grand jury, that grand jury saw fit not to indict that officer.
One of the accusations that's been made, and it's kind of coming out in this race so far, is that you as DA give sort of sweetheart deals to bigger name attorneys in Las Vegas, David Chesnoff among others. What do you say to those accusations that when you're talking about settling cases before they even get to trial, some of the high-powered attorneys here in Las Vegas get the benefit of the DA's office? Yeah,
I wonder what those muckrackers, which Mr. John Ralston referred to them as, whether or not they did enough research. Because it's my understanding that Mr. Chesnoff has challenged those accusations. I challenged those accusations as well. There was an individual represented by Mr. Chesnoff that was found guilty of a very serious felony DUI involving death and injury. Ask that gentleman if he thinks that his lawyer got special treatment, because that gentleman is now serving a significant prison sentence. There's another case in the system right now involving a basketball player where a certain charge was dismissed in a proceeding, and we're still moving forward on that case, notwithstanding who his lawyer is. So I take exception to the accusation that certain lawyers get special deals. We evaluate cases on a case-by-case basis, John, and we look at the strength or weakness, the merits of the case when we decide how to handle it.
The DUI case District Attorney Wolfson referenced is Scott Gregson. A person was killed in that crash. He's serving 8 to 20 years in prison. The other is Zayon Collins, who was a basketball player heading to UNLV. That case is still working its way through the court system. By the way, David Chesnoff's attorney reached out after that interview. She told us there's a retraction being issued by the people who made that accusation of favoritism from the DA's office. That whole interview with DA Wolfson will be at 8newsnow.com. So far, his only challenger is Ozzie Fumo, who, like Wolfson, is a Democrat. Wolfson did not face a Republican challenger in 2018 either, so he won re-election when he won the Democratic primary. Well, the rent is way too high. That's what many people in the Valley are saying right now. According to Zillow, our rents are increasing at the second fastest rate in the country, just behind Phoenix. So what's causing the rapid spike? I talked with Susie Vasquez of the Nevada State Apartment Association to find out.
We keep hearing from viewers about the rent going up, and not just like $25, but like $200, $300, $400. What's behind this?
Primarily, the rent increases can be attributed to the supply or the lack thereof. So typically, we have about 10 to 11,000 units available in Clark County, but we're currently at 6,800 units. So that is a significantly low amount of available units.
When you're talking about people moving from out of state, are we referring to mainly Californians? I mean, I know it varies, but is that a huge chunk?
A huge chunk. I can't remember what the percentage is, but it is close to 40% of the people that are moving to Nevada are directly from California.
Has there been any buzz on rent control?
Don't say those words.
I thought that would be your response.
It is, I mean, if you can find a program, a rent control program somewhere in this nation that actually works, I'd be more than happy to have a conversation around it. We have yet to see a program that actually works. It really is just a Band-Aid that makes it worse. It's a temporary solution for a supply problem.
Also this week, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down the CDC's eviction moratorium. So we're keeping an eye on how much evictions may pick back up. But Nevada offers some protections through an assembly bill. In the meantime, we have plenty of resources for those who need help and what to do if you're facing an eviction at 8newsnow.com. Tempers flared over an anti-racism policy for schools. During this week's CCSD Board of Trustees meeting, district leaders presented a timeline for their plan. 8 News Now's Sasha Loftus was there for all of the fireworks.
Turmoil takes center stage at yet another CCSD Board of Trustees meeting.
And Dr. Barton does a great job in understanding all the training.
Parents, teachers, and students spoke out on a district-wide anti-racism policy.
Our children are not protected. They are not being protected.
Many pushed for progress, demanding concrete policies in schools now, while others are against any action.
It's become clear that we're just not, we're on such different pages, and we just have totally different views.
This topic was first touched on back in June, after this year's passage of Nevada Assembly Bill 371, which includes racial discrimination and existing laws related to bullying.
Discrimination based on race, bullying, and cyberbullying.
On Thursday, the first timeline to develop this policy in CCSD was presented, with a mention of staff education and community accountability.
Well, I've already heard the word N-word said to me multiple times. I've had teachers tell me that I don't have a future because I'm black.
A final adoption is set for January, but many students say they're suffering now, and they're asking for immediate change.
Our kids just have to continue to go through this. We're not standing for it.
To move toward a better experience in the classroom.
I deserve to go to the class and not feel scared.
Sasha Loftus, 8 News Now.
The district also formed a task force to help with the development of anti-racism policies. It was made clear that critical race theory would not be part of any plan moving forward. Wanting to break up CCSD.
It's going to be long, it's going to be hard, but it's worth the effort.
Up next on Politics Now, Henderson candidate for Mayor Dan Stewart talks to us about why his top priority is getting the city its own school district.
Welcome back to Politics Now.
2 members of the Henderson City Council are hoping to upgrade to mayor. Dan Stewart has been on the council since 2017. His opponent is Michelle Romero. John Langler talked with Dan Stewart about his vision for the city.
First question, why do you want to be mayor?
Well, I think probably most important, 2 things even. Most important is I think we've reached a critical point in the growth and evolution of our city that I think we really need some sophisticated thought and planning to take us into that next step. But most importantly, I've got to tell you, I want to lead the charge in taking back control of our schools.
You mentioned the school district. You started a PAC, I believe.
Yes.
You are determined to separate Henderson School District or Henderson from CCSD. Why?
Well, the easy answer, which is the truth, is CCSD is just too big. It's just become unwieldy. We can't get anything done. It's too big. It's just a morass of red tape. And we need to have local control. Parents need to be able to be more involved with their own children and the children's education. And the only way to do that is to make school districts smaller.
How do you plan to differentiate yourself from your opponent, considering if you look just sort of, one against one, a lot of your positions are pretty similar in terms of your vision for the future, the economic development aspect, the school district aspect, public safety. There's not a whole lot of difference, is there? So
there's huge difference.
So tell me about what they are.
The perspective. I have been 45 years in this valley, and I'm a businessman. I come from a total businessman's point of view, business person's point of view, excuse me. And that perspective is necessary to get these hard things done. And perspective is everything. I come from the taxpayer. I come from a customer of government. I've worked through government and the red tape my entire life.
How much of a change from the current course of action do you anticipate if you become mayor? Is it status quo, or is it, okay, I'm Mayor Stewart, we're going to chart a little bit of a different course here?
That's a very good question. I'm not one to come in and wave my arms and say we need to change. I think we need to course correct a little bit.
How so? Just elaborate that a little bit more if you can.
Again, back to that point of becoming a little more sophisticated.
What does that mean by
sophisticated?
I know what sophisticated means, but like in terms of city development.
sustainable growth. Not just sustainable growth and development, but a sustainable community. How do we continue to be the Henderson that we are and that we love and that we love being part of? But how do we anticipate and plan for the future growth? Growth is coming. We just need to make sure we do it in the right, proper way.
The number one priority in your view for Henderson moving forward?
Take control of the schools, our own schools. That's my mission. That's what gets me up in the morning. I'm passionate about it. We're going to make this happen.
As you can tell, Dan Stewart really wants to break up the school district. Henderson racers for mayor are nonpartisan, but both Stewart and Romero are Republicans. You can watch that full interview and our interview with Romero at 8newsnow.com. Nevada will not be joining a group of states which have an agreement with drug companies over opioid lawsuits. 44 states are signing on to the settlement with Johnson & Johnson and other drug companies that make prescription opioids. Nevada would have received $282 million of the total $26 billion deal. Attorney General Aaron Ford thinks Nevada can get more than of that on its own. He says Nevada will be making its own settlements, which he's calling the One Nevada Agreement. That will allow individual counties to be part of them as well. Attorney Sigal Chattah, a Republican running against Ford for Attorney General, criticized the decision, saying in part, nearly every state has signed on to the opioid settlement except for Aaron Ford, who appears to be looking out for his former employer more than he's looking out for his current employer, Nevada's citizens. The law firm representing 9 Nevada counties or cities in their lawsuits is Ford's former employer, Egglet Prince. Desperate to save his family.
My wife, she's out of the danger zone, and I'm focused on saving everybody else.
Up next, an Afghan who helped the U.S. military and now lives in Las Vegas, desperate to get his family out and to safety.
You're watching Politics Now.
At least 2 explosions in Kabul on Thursday killed at least 12 U.S. service members and 200 Afghans. Pentagon officials warned there's a very real threat of additional terrorist attacks in Kabul and say that if the U.S. can find those responsible for the attack in Kabul, the U.S. military will respond. U.S. officials say a suicide bomber is responsible for an explosion that killed 12 U.S. service members and injured 15 more. There are also a number of additional reported attacks, and at least 60 Afghans have been killed.
The attack on the Abbey Gate was followed by a number of ISIS gunmen who opened fire on civilians and military forces.
Pentagon officials say there was clearly a failure because the attackers passed through several checkpoints controlled by the Taliban or Afghan forces before reaching the airport gates and U.S. troops. Now to the story of an Afghan who worked as a special ops translator and now lives in Las Vegas. He has been working to get his wife out of Afghanistan and to America safely. In the meantime, she has been hiding from the Taliban. That is why we're protecting their identity in this story. Kirsten Joyce tells us how she's making it out.
She is safe.
Words HK has been waiting to share since I first met him 2 weeks ago.
15 days that I haven't had probably no more than 2 hours sleep a night.
HK lives in Las Vegas, where he became a U.S. citizen last year. He and his wife got married in Afghanistan, and he's been working for a year to supply her with the proper documents to come to the States. After the Taliban takeover, he was scared for his wife's life. She had to hide out just 10 minutes from the airport in Kabul.
There was times of over 9,000 people around the airport. It was a humanitarian disaster.
HK worked day and night with a variety of contacts to get her safely to the airport. Folks he met through his time as a translator, helping the U.S. military in Afghanistan for nearly a decade. His journey and efforts being documented by his friend Bryant Johnson.
A guy who speaks 5 languages, that's beloved by the U.S. military, by special forces, that has worked with our troops on the ground and loves this country and now just wants to support his community.
HK shared this photo with us of his wife and brother-in-law when they received news they would be safely leaving Afghanistan on Monday. They are now in Kuwait.
So last I heard from the embassy in Kuwait, the U.S. embassy, they say that they're being processed, and once they're getting ready to take off from there, and they'll possibly send me, a description of the flight itinerary where they're going. Bring them here, bring them to the, where I am. So hopefully that happens. I'll go see her wherever she lands in the United States, and we'll go from there.
It's funny, he thinks he's going by himself. That's cute. Where are we going? Where are we going? Let's go.
Although his wife and brother-in-law are out of harm's way, HK says his mission is far from over.
My wife, she's out of the danger zone, and I am focused on saving everybody else.
Kirsten Joyce, 8 News Now.
HK and Bryant are currently in North Carolina, hoping HK's wife lands there, but if not, they'll go to wherever she's flown. HK has lived in Las Vegas for 8 years. His mother and father also live here. We'll bring you the reunion, of course, when he gets to embrace his wife on U.S. soil. Up next on Politics Now, a key date where several unemployment programs will end is just a few weeks away.